Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. In the last lecture, I gave an introduction to the problem of free will and determinism, and we looked at hard determinism, the Holbach's strongest desire argument for hard determinism. Recall that the hard determinists are incompatibilists about freedom. They think that the truth of free will defined a particular way is incompatible logically with the truth of the intuition that we have at least some free will, right? That we're acting free, we have a capacity to make choices, right? Genuine choices. And so the hard determinist way of trying to resolve that contradiction is to lop off free will. So again, just recall that basic problem. We started with an apparent contradiction between that intuition we have that we're at least acting freely in some situations, and then the standard account of causation, or that principle of determinism, the universal principle of law, or cause and effect law, right? Or the universal principle of causation, as the book calls it. And so again, the hard determinist says free will is an illusion there. This time around, we'll look at a different view. We'll also look at how the view that we look at today would criticize hard determinism as well as a positive argument for itself. And so remember, our basic problem here is just this conceptual difficulty of trying to explain how we can reconcile free will, however that might be defined, with the truth of determinism, right? Not hard determinism, just determinism itself, right? Just that principle of causation. So again, what we'll look at in this lecture is compatibilism, also called soft determinism. So whereas the hard determinists, like de Holbach, with his strongest desire argument, they're indeterminists about freedom. They think that a free action would be an uncaused action. And since there are no such things, they deny free will. The soft determinist is going to have a different view of how to define free will, so we'll have to pay attention to that. And we'll look at how the compatibilist would criticize the strongest desire argument as well as the argument for compatibilism here. So let's get into it here. So unlike, your textbook, the textbook that I usually use here and that I'm using this semester is Classic Questions, and it includes a primary source selection from a proponent of hard determinism. That was the reading from de Holbach. The textbook doesn't include anything from a compatibilist, although they talk about, the Klosowski, the textbook author, talks about compatibilism. There's no reading from a compatibilist, just the textbook author's discussion of it. And so I pulled out some quotes from a compatibilist thinker that go along with what's discussed in the textbook. So this time I am gonna go over a few quotes. I didn't do that last time since the reading was included in the book, but this time I will. So he starts off by talking about the problem and hard determinists, right? So he says, it's to be observed that the learned philosophers, professors of philosophy or psychology who deny the existence of free will do solely in their professional moments and in their studies and lecture rooms. For when it comes to doing anything practical, they invariably behave as if they and others were free, all of which is inconsistent with disbelief in free will. This should cause us to suspect that the problem is not a real one, and this, I believe, is the case. The dispute is merely verbal and is due to nothing but a confusion about the meanings of words. Stace here, the thinker that I'm referring to and using quotes from here, is an example of an ordinary language philosopher. And that's a school of philosophy that's from the 20th century that thought many philosophical problems could be resolved. We would see that they're not really problems if we got clear about language. And so you see, and we should take our meanings to terms from ordinary usage, right? And so you see that maneuver here in this paragraph. And so a verbal dispute, right? A semantic argument over free will. So he says, Stace here, the problem has been created by the fact that learned men, especially philosophers, have assumed an incorrect definition of free will. And so he's raising the issue of how we're going to conceive of things, right? So at the beginning of the semester, I had a clip posted on Moodle about, what does soup count as a meal? Does deep dish pizza count as genuine pizza? So it's this issue of how to define something precisely here, beyond just a lexical definition. And so he says, they have assumed the incorrect definition of free will, and then finding that there's nothing in the world which answers to their definition, have denied its existence. And he says, let us shorten this by saying that free will, he's talking about the hard determinists, right, which are incompatibilists, right, define free will as meaning indeterminism. This is the incorrect definition, which has led to the denial of free will. Well, indeterminism is the idea that something happens without a cause, right? Since there are no uncaused actions, we should think there's no free will if we're operating on that definition of free will. And so here's de Holbach's strongest desire argument for hard determinism. And we already have enough from our compatibilist view to start thinking about how the compatibilist might criticize this argument from de Holbach. So if actions are caused by the strongest desire, then human beings do not have free will. Actions are caused by the strongest desire, thus human beings do not have free will. Well, the concept, we've just seen Stace take issue with how the hard determinist has defined free will, and that idea only pops up in one premise in this argument, and so it probably is jumping out to you already. Which premise is the problematic one according to compatibilism? And then, so he criticizes that notion of indeterminism. Well, then what, free will as an uncaused action or as indeterminism? Well, then how should we conceive of free will? And he makes a distinction here between internal and external causes. Remember, the soft determinist or compatibilist is not denying free will. They're going to claim that free will is compatible with the truth of determinism. Again, not hard determinism, just determinism, the law of cause and effect. So on the one hand, we have actions that are not free. Leaving the movie theater because you were thrown out, confessing because you got beaten, or going hungry because no food was available. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, we have free actions. Leaving the movie theater because you thought the movie was horrible. I walked out of Troop Beverly Hills one time. Confessing because you wanted to tell the truth, and going hungry because you decided to go on a hunger strike. Well, the difference between what's in the left column and what's on the right column is that the free actions had a cause that was internal to the agent rather than some external state of affairs in the world, right? I got to pause here for a second because my cat's over here going nuts. Sazerac, no. Get away. All right. Back to free will and determinism here. So again, the unfree or not free actions, those are the result of an external cause, right? External to the agent. Free actions are the ones that are caused by the internal psychological states of the agent themselves. And so here's our alternative conception of free action. It's not an uncaused action, it's the capacity to do otherwise. So long as I have different desires on the inside of my head or different mental or psychological states, that's what's causing the action, and it's a free action, right? So he says, acts freely done are those whose immediate causes are the psychological states in the agent. Acts not done freely are those whose immediate causes are states of affairs external to the agent. So we get an internal-external cause distinction. Notice that de Holbach just thought of causation one way. Stace here has complicated things a little bit. And then like de Holbach went through and tried to undermine or refute different conceptions of freedom, Stace considers an objection as well. So one of the things you ought to pick up on with regard to doing philosophy in general is, presenting a position and then trying to not only a positive position for one's own view, but responding to objections with, or possible objections with responses, rejoinders that are also free of any major errors of fact fallacy or self-contradiction. And so the first objection that Stace considers here, according to our view, an action may be free, though it could have been predicted beforehand with certainty, but suppose you told a lie and it was certain beforehand that you would tell it. How could one then say you have told the truth? Well, the answer is perfectly true that you would have told the truth had you wanted to, right? So it's about your wants and desires internal to you. In fact, you would have done so for, in that case, the causes producing your action, namely your desires, would have been different and therefore would have produced different effects. So even if we could tell in advance what you were going to do, doesn't mean it's not a free action. So that's contrary to the Minority Report situation, right, if you've seen that movie. And then punishment and responsibility. Thus, we can see that moral responsibility is not only consistent with determinism, there's the compatibilism, right, but requires it. The assumption on which punishment is based is that behavior is causally determined, right? If there were no determinism at all, our actions would be completely unpredictable and capricious, and we wouldn't be responsible for them. And this in itself is a strong argument against the view of philosophers that free will means being undetermined by causes. So again, a return there to a point about the hard determinist conception of free will. So drawing on this distinction between internal and external causes from Stace and the notion of the compatibilist conception of free will as the capacity to do otherwise, right? Pause here for a second and try and reconstruct Stace's basic argument for compatibilism. And that would involve arguing for the conclusion that thus human beings are we sometimes act freely. Your argument, one of the premises of your argument is going to have to rely on this distinction between internal and external causes. So pause the video here for a second and get some practice reconstructing that argument. Okay, hopefully you've got your own version of this argument based on what's said in the textbook and what we've said here in lecture. Let's go ahead and reconstruct a version of an argument for compatibilism. So let's call this the internal-external cause argument. So if the immediate cause of an action is an internal psychological or mental state rather than an external state of affairs, then some actions are a product of free will. And then I have in parentheses here the capacity to do otherwise to denote. Now we're working with it to just keep us straight that we're working with a different conception of what a free action is. The immediate cause of some actions is an internal psychological state rather than an external state of affairs. Thus, some actions are a product of free will, namely those whose immediate cause is an internal psychological state. So there we get an argument for compatibilism. And then the question is always, does this argument contain any major errors of fact, fallacy, self-contradiction, or now we've got to worry about this fourth category, a false conditional premise for reasons other than a self-contradiction, where the consequent doesn't necessarily follow from the truth of the antecedent, but not because of a contradiction. So, and of course there are criticisms here. Y'all have listened to these lectures enough to know that, no argument escapes some possible criticism to worry about here, at least initially, even if in the end of the day the criticism doesn't refute it. And so as again, a pop culture example of a illustration of a potential criticism here, let's take a look at this scene from Clockwork Orange, or at least a little bit of this scene. Well, actually, I won't play it here. I've linked to it on Moodle. The upshot of the clip is that what happens on the inside of our heads, the psychological states that we have internal to us, are really just the results of previous external experiences impinging on our psychological states. So here's a philosopher, John Hospers, illustrating or discussing this kind of criticism here. So he says, everyone has been molded by influences which in large measure at least determine his present behavior. He is literally the product of these influences stemming from periods prior to his years of discretion, giving him a host of character traits that he cannot change now, even if he would. It's not as if man's will were standing high and serene above the flux of events that have molded him. It is itself caught up in this flux, itself carrying on the current. What if even the degree of willpower available to him in shaping his habits and disciplining himself now to overcome the influence of early environment is a fact over which he has no control? What are we to say of this kind of freedom? It's not my purpose here to establish the thesis in general, but let me try to summarize briefly the psychoanalytic doctrine on this point. So sometimes I call this the Hosper's objection or the psychoanalytic objection to compatibilism. So the conscious life of the human being, including the conscious decisions and volitions, is merely a mouthpiece for the unconscious, not directly for the enactment of unconscious drives, but the compromise between unconscious drives and conscious reproaches. The import for us to see is that it is the unconscious that determines the conscious impulse and what the conscious shall be. So assume for the sake of argument that Hospers is correct about this. There are other ways to make this same basic point that don't rely on psychoanalysis, just regular old, it's pretty clear from the human sciences that human beings have unconscious behaviors that we engage in, right? And so we've got the internal-external cause argument that we just created, and the question then is, according to Hosper's psychoanalytic objection, does the argument contain an error of fact, fallacy, self-contradiction, or a false conditional premise? And then explain why. So again, like we've been working on, identify the number of the problematic premise that's attacked by that criticism, and then identify what type of error Hosper's is identifying in the argument. So again, to recap some of those basic categories, if he's relying on some kind of scientific information, it'd be an error of fact. If it commits one of our informal fallacies that you've learned about either through reading or through the ones that we've already covered, then we have to worry about a fallacy, an error in reasoning such that the truth of the premises don't imply the truth of the conclusion. If we've got a violation of the law of non-contradiction, we'd have a self-contradiction. Or if premise one was such that the truth of the consequent doesn't necessarily follow from the truth of the antecedent, we'd have to worry about that objection as well. And so what you're doing is trying to figure out, well, what's the link in Hosper's criticism? He's saying that if we're unconscious, then our internal state, we're not really in control of our internal psychological states, and therefore couldn't be in control of our present choices. We'd have to go back in time and change different things about the facts that were around us when we were shaped, and we can't do that. So therefore, it looks like we don't have the capacity to really do otherwise. Well, so just looking at one basic argument for hard determinism, a classical one, and another argument for compatibilism, it looks like either way we go, we run into a dilemma. We run into a problem. If we say that our actions are caused, given the truth of determinism, and both the hard determinist and the soft determinist or compatibilist grant the truth of determinism, then our actions are uncaused. So either way we go, we're not free and responsible for our actions. This is what your textbook calls the dilemma of human freedom. So it looks like, because of the successive failures of both of the two positions and basic arguments that we've looked at so far, and always keep in mind again that there are many, many arguments that can be given for these different positions. We're just looking at a couple, really usually just one per position, that we end up with this dilemma. So if it looks like we're trapped, it looks like the problem is granting the truth of determinism itself. So far, the two positions we've looked at both affirm the universal principle of causation. The next view that we look at, libertarianism, and again, here we're talking about the metaphysics of free will, not a political conception of freedom, which is a related but different issue. We're just looking at the metaphysical question, whether human beings by nature have some kind of capacity for free will or not, however that might be defined. So we run into a problem then, granting the truth of causation, or the universal principle of causation. So the next view we look at, libertarianism, is going to take issue with that, drawing on some contemporary science. Remember, de Holbach was worried about the science of his day that showed that the universe operates like a big mechanistic machine. Well, some contemporary science says otherwise. And so that's where we'll begin thinking about a possible libertarian position in the next lecture. All right, as always, send me questions if you have them, post them in the discussion forum, and I hope everybody's doing well.